the remake in Final Fantasy VII Remake refers to more than just the technical aspects of the original 1997 game being remade, which, by the way, is my favorite version of this game, is the original from the 90s. That could just be that because I'm old and I prefer the original versions of a lot of different content, because a lot of the times the remakes end up being some kind of slop. But I can't judge because I have yet to play the remake, because I was expecting when it came out that it would just be like the full game remade all in one shot. But apparently, the people that remade the game thought better of it. Anyway, the remaking of Fate is a core concept of the title that adds additional layers to its story. Remake's sequel, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, continues that trend by exploring a world reborn by machinations of the game's antagonist Sephiroth. As such, it stands to reason that the final game in the trilogy will use a similar naming convention that ties into the reimagining meta-narrative. And according to that game's director, Naoki Hamaguchi, the third and final installment's title has been decided by the trilogy's creator-director Tetsuya Nomura. I remember an interview I did at Paris Game Week about how we narrowed it down to two names, says Hamaguchi. It was up to Mr. Nomura to decide which it is. And yes, after returning from Paris Game Week, he did choose one, so I can say that the title has been locked. And we'll read this article and then we'll watch this video. Hamaguchi is in New York City to promote the release of Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade on the Nintendo Switch 2, giving us the opportunity to speak with him about the franchise. Regarding the game's performance on the device, which has been received positively by even the most diehard of pixel peepers, well, that's a term I've not actually ever heard before. Hamaguchi says that while it was relatively smooth getting the game running on the hardware, the team spent a lot of time trying to achieve a stable frame rate. I would imagine it would be, because as I recall, when the first game came out, it was pretty graphics heavy. I thought at the time, and that without some kind of major transforming of how the game ran, it really wouldn't run on anything less than a PlayStation or an Xbox. I do kind of still miss the whole exclusives to certain consoles. This was one of them back in the 90s. This was exclusively on PlayStation. And I think making things cross-platform kind of ruins the whole one console over another. The director also notes that it is also a challenge the team is dealing with on the Switch 2 port of Rebirth, though Hamaguchi confirms the studio has managed to get the sequel up and running on the device. I can't imagine that would have been actually really all that easy, because the Switch 2 is still technically a handheld and not a full-on console. While we have gotten Rebirth to function on Switch 2, we still need to make sure that frame rates are stable. Our engineers are trying to fine-tune that and make sure we are optimizing properly, says Hamaguchi. The first two parts of the trilogy were built using Unreal Engine 4, which has been surpassed by the release of UE5 in 2021. While Hamaguchi previously states the team has been considering transferring development of the final title over to the more modern engine, he confirms with us that they are sticking with UE4 for the game. While we've been using Unreal Engine 4, we've made a lot of modifications to fit our needs, says Hamaguchi. It's more beneficial to have something we're already familiar with and have customized to fit our needs. Yeah, I would agree. You really ought to, if you're making a trilogy, you really should try to make all the games on the same engine, so that way everything at least looks relatively the same. Because you don't want two games on 4 and then the third one on 5 and the fifth one being like graphically better. It could ruin people's outlook on the first two. And like he said, it's better to stick to a platform you know than switching to the new version and having the platform be completely different and stuff you're not necessarily used to. And that would actually also speed up production, keeping it on Unreal 4 versus moving to 5. Another aspect of modern game development that has been widely discussed is generative AI. In a previous interview, Hamaguchi stated that Square Enix didn't have any set down rules regarding the technology. However, in between that interview being conducted and published, Square Enix released a financial report that did lay out some of the ways it planned to utilize the technology, partnering with the Matsuo Laboratory at the University of Tokyo with the goal of using Gen AI to automate 70% of QA and debugging tasks in game development by the end of 2027. In my day job, AI is something that I do have to use periodically from time to time, and I don't use it for the main tasks. I do, however, use it in checking my codes and stuff like that, rather than having to through program that'll test run it and then trying to read through all the code and trying to find where exactly that error is. When you can put it into something like Grok and have it and say, hey, check this for continuity errors or bugs, it'll run it through, it'll look at everything, and it'll tell you, hey, there's an error here with this specific line, or it'll say no errors, go ahead and test run, essentially. And so that would cut down on a lot of tasks, having people read over a bunch of code. Games are wont to have so mountains and mountains of code and assets to read over and look over, so that makes sense to use it in that particular spot. I am not a fan necessarily of running the whole game through AI, but if you're smaller and you need specific specialized tasks, you can fill in those gaps, and I personally wouldn't have a problem. Or to do your initial first round quality checks. Also, not a problem. If AI is not generating a majority of the game, I personally have no issue. My stance hasn't changed depending on AI to produce something or to create something, says Hamaguchi. I don't rely on AI to come up with ideas and things like that. That's what I was saying. You don't use AI for that. That said, AI is a tool that I and other colleagues would utilize so that our tasks would become much smoother, or some of the menial tasks are taken care of by AI, like your initial QA checks or debugging your code. I think that becoming more and more necessary. I think it's becoming more and more necessary. I think the purpose of utilizing these tools is so that the creators will have a better environment so that they can work more efficiently and they can explore more creative options. Hamaguchi proceeds to address the automation of the QA process with generative AI. Some of the quality control testing requires very menial tasks, like collision check, says Hamaguchi. It's a tedious task that's very repetitive. By automating that using AI, we reduce the stress on the human that is required to check on it, and it would save their retinas. Holy smokes, having to stare at the same section repeatedly, nonstop, that would burn your eyeballs out. It would just flag an alert, and then the developers would get that information, so we're hoping that that would lower the bandwidth that is required of our people. Well, you would lower the stress on your people, but you're going to exponentially expand the literal bandwidth on your computers and your data sets. 2025 marked the 10-year anniversary since the start of development on this trilogy of titles. Ahead of the series' conclusion, we asked Hamaguchi whether the team is eager to move on or is savoring its final months, potentially years, with Final Fantasy VII. I mean, when you've been on a project as long as they have for this specific trilogy of titles, which I personally still think should have just been one massive game like the original, but that's just me being old, and that way they can't charge me 3 times for the same game. I'm also a cheap bastard, apparently. That's a good question, and also a very difficult question to answer, says Hamaguchi. We want to see it through, and we want to meet, if not surpass, fan expectations with the final installment. With a line like that, I'm really hoping, for those of you that actually played the remake, that this particular installment is not absolute trash, considering all the things that we've been getting from other studios. But it would be a lie to say that I haven't thought, oh no, there's still more I have to get through, especially when transitioning from the first to second game. But now that we are seeing the conclusion of the trilogy, there is no wavering. We are focused and we want to see it through. Alright, so I really hope that this game actually doesn't turn about. Alright, let's check out this video and see what it says.
At the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, Square Enix made it perfectly clear that whatever lay in store for our band of adventurers would surely be significantly different from the original game. Now that we finally have our hands on the second installment in the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we can confirm that there are numerous differences between it and the 1997 classic. We cover all the biggest changes made to the original Final Fantasy.
So here's a bit of a take, my personal, as far as the characters go. Sid was always my favorite a non-main story character, honestly.
Fantasy 7 Rebirth. We'll start with the least spoiler-filled changes before giving you a big bolded warning and digging into the juicy stuff.
Okay, so for those of you that care, there is going to be spoilers. So if you don't want spoilers, I suggest you skip probably the next 10, 11 minutes or so. Because there's, like I said, like they told you in the video, there is going to be spoilers here.
Like previous Final Fantasy VII entries, materia, orbs of solidified lifestream that grant the wielder unique powers, come in 5 different forms. Green materia is most common and offers the user both offensive and defensive spells. Yellow materia contains additional battle commands, purple provides stat boosts, blue augments whatever materia it is attached to, and red grants the user the...
My favorite blue materia was Quadcast, or was that purple? Can't remember, it's been a long time, but I always liked, as far as like my materia settings, I always liked setting up the Knights of Round Summon with like the Quadcast materia, and then have somebody else cast Mimic, and so that way you basically cast the same summon at least 5 or 6 times, and it was really helpful when fighting roaming androids.
The ability to summon gods and creatures that can help turn the tide of battle. However, while all this seems familiar, Rebirth adds a few new materia to the mix. To give a few examples, Fire and Ice and Lightning and Wind materia are new additions that give the user
Wait, Fire and Ice are new additions?
2 spells while using only 1 materia slot. Disempowerment and Enervate.
That wasn't these are 2 separate materia spots, but they're combined. So you're still using 2 materia spots. This is like a weapon setting and not specific, unless they're actually allowing you to actually put 2 materias of the same color into that same spot. Okay, so that actually, now that I'm actually like paying attention, it does look like that's the case. So fire and ice, so you're allowed to put 2 in the same spot. Okay, my fault. I spoke ahead of time. That is completely my fault.
Slot. Disempowerment and Enervation both focus on debuffs, with Disempowerment casting Debrave, attack down.
Okay, so those are new materia to me altogether. This empowerment materia, I've never heard of it.
And De-Faith, defense down, while Enervation casts De-Protect and De-Shell. In contrast, Fortification and Empowerment provide your team with Bravery and Faith, as well as Protect and Shell. Additional new materia includes Subversion, Synergy, Dark Side, Autocast, Spare Change.
Wait, they're just now putting in like the some of these other materials? Because I'm pretty sure I remember Autocast, unless I'm thinking of a different Final Fantasy game. Let me double check real quick. Let me see. Okay, so I guess it is only in the new one. Maybe looks like I'm out of my head. Okay, my mistake. It just sounded really familiar.
Limit Siphon, Magic Pot, Bahamut Arisen, and more. Suffice it to say, there are a lot of
Another new
combinations
version
to
of
experiment
Bahamut?
with. Synergy abilities are a new feature that see your party members come together to dish out powerful attacks or tide-changing support abilities. There are a pretty impressive number of these, as each character has 3 unique abilities they can perform with set party members. Cloud, for example, can use the abilities Ranged Blade, Melee Blade, and Counterfire.
I still miss when you just had all 4 parties on there at the same time. But then again, I still prefer the old school turn-based system. I don't necessarily like the whole one-on-one swap out your characters as you want situation. But that's just me. That's my personal preference.
While Counterfire can be used solo, Ranged Blade couples with either Red 13 or Barret, while Melee Blade requires either Tifa, Aerith, Yuffie, or Cait Sith to use. However, don't think you can use every synergy ability in the game from the very start. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth introduces a new system that is extremely reminiscent of Final Fantasy X Sphere Grid called Folios. Folios allow players to tailor their character's combat style by cashing in
Why would you put in other elements of different Final Fantasy games into what's supposed to be a remake of Final Fantasy VII? This is part of the issue that I personally have with this game being called a remake when it's clearly not just a remake. I don't like games being called a remake if they're not like a true to the source remake.
SP skill points to unlock new moves, stat buffs, and of course, synergy abilities. Be warned that it's a pretty tall order to unlock every ability on a character's folio, so we encourage you to look ahead and establish your various characters' playstyles early to make things easier.
Why they gotta
This can
make
also
this
be
game
reset
even more
at any Magdata
complicated than it
books
was
or various
originally?
folio kiosks throughout the world.
I hate that.
In addition, characters' weapons now have unique abilities as well. Tifa, for example, can gain Dive Kick, Reverse Gale, Star Shower, Chi Trap, Unfettered Fury, and True Strike from Leather Gloves, Sylph Gloves, Dragon Claws, Tiger Fangs, Crystal Gloves, and Yarn Griper, respectively. By using a particular weapon for a long time, you can eventually level it up, allowing you to use its special ability regardless of whether or not that weapon is equipped. Unless you're playing on the game's lowest, most forgiving difficulty, assessing your enemies and paying attention to their weaknesses is vital. Whereas it was fairly easy to level grind and brute strength your way through Final Fantasy VII, Rebirth doesn't let it slide. I recommend at least one per.
I don't remember, like, trying to brute strength your way through the game being all that particularly easy unless you, like, went and you overpowered yourself for specific bosses. That's just me. And like I said, it's been a really long time since I have actually played that game.
Person in your party carrying an assess materia and using it whenever a certain enemy is giving you a hard time. Thankfully, once you scan a certain type of enemy, you never have to do it again, which keeps the whole process from feeling annoying. While it's no secret that the 97 did have a relationship gauge of sorts hidden away within its code, it's a lot more explicit in Rebirth.
Yeah, it was hidden away in its code, but it wasn't exactly something you could actually do anything with. Like, you couldn't utilize it because they, or at least not here in the United States, it wasn't a aspect of the game that they really allowed. In fact, probably they killed off one of the people that you could probably even do that with before the game was really even half over, especially if you sped your way through it. Aerith got killed really early.
In Rebirth, your relationship status with each character is indicated by a small icon located above their head that you can view at any time by pressing L1. Easy ways you can improve your relationships include completing a party member's respective side quests, which are indicated by their portrait shown next to the quest in the game's main menu, and by executing a synergy.
That's a feature that a lot of games seem to be adding now with these NPC side quests. Outer Worlds has it, and several other games have it as well.
Ability for the first time together. Additionally, many of Cloud's words and actions will elicit some kind of reaction from your party members, and there will even be times when he is put in a position where he will have to side with one character over another, such as when the thrill-seeking Barrett and motion sickness-prone Yuffie disagree on a certain method of transportation. While you won't be able to upset a character to the point of leaving, having a good relationship does make for better conversation and better dates. Chocobos are handled quite a bit differently in Rebirth, pun intended. Whereas Final Fantasy VII required Cloud to equip the Attract Chocobo materia, run up and down Chocobo tracks until one appeared in battle, and toss greens at the bird until all other enemies were defeated and it joined your ranks, Rebirth tasks you with completing a...
And that wasn't the only part of it either. You actually had to ride that thing to the Chocobo farm before you could actually keep it. But that was part of the thing that I actually kind of liked. It was like a almost Pokemon-like, really, when you were like searching for Pokemon in the tall grass. Rather than tall grass, you had to run up and down on these tracks on the world map and hope you actually had a Chocobo encounter. So I actually kind of preferred that.
Small stealth puzzle. Each region of the game has a specific named Chocobo with a unique ability that you must sneak up on and catch. To do so, you'll have to duck behind minecarts, avoid the wandering eyes of its Chocobo companions, and use rocks to hit levers and cause distractions. It's a fun spin on an old system, and don't worry, you'll still get the chance to race all the ones you find over at the Gold Saucer.
And that was another thing that I liked about, was like how you had to go about getting the gold Chocobo and what the gold Chocobo is actually used for. And once you actually got the gold Chocobo, you actually did not need any of the other vehicles that you received in the game. In fact, the gold Chocobo is the only way that you could actually get the Knights of Round materia in the world map, because it's on a cave, or it's in a mountain cave on a small island. You would need both the airship before it could take off, and the submarine. I think it was a submarine. It's been a really long time since I played, but you needed the deep water vehicle and the shallow water vehicle essentially at the same time in order to get it, which means it was impossible without the gold Chocobo, is the punchline to that.
Just Final Fantasy VII Remake made a once 7-hour portion of the original game take closer to 40 hours to complete, Rebirth adds a lot of content in its effort to turn the classic title into a modern open-world RPG. Naturally, a lot of this comes from side quests, some of which inject lighthearted humor into the game while others dig deep into your party members' backstories and emotions.
I will say that's kind of cool. You can actually, like in situations where there's like pseudo cutscenes, and you look at the weapons, you can actually see the materia embedded in the weapons in some cases, which I think is actually kind of a cool aspect to it.
Beyond side quests, Rebirth also adds a lot of exploration elements. Each of the game's regions has several unique locations and sites to explore, such as large Remna-wave towers that grant you area intel, life springs, excavation sites, summon sanctuaries, chocobos, Moogle homes, or mogstools, and more. Suffice it to say, you won't be lacking things to do. Lastly, Rebirth is absolutely
See, that's the kind of stuff I want to see. I want to see like this old school type stuff in the game, honestly.
packed to the brim with mini games, so here's hoping you like them. From the latest card game craze, Queen's Blood, to a new version of Fort Condor that transforms your party members back to their previous polygonal self.
So that game, Queen's Blood, they brought that into this game, and I'm guessing, I think it was part of some of the other previous versions as well. But yeah, they've brought it back into the third thing, and that's actually going to be some of the topic of some of the other articles related to this Final Fantasy VII that I actually found. So we're going to go over those next after this.
Elves, you won't go long without being encouraged to play, race, and compete. Long gone are the days of wandering the woods in search of Yuffie Kisaragi or slinking about through Shinra Manor in hopes of rousing Vincent.
See, now those were the cool things. They were optional characters that you didn't necessarily have to get, but they made it easier. Vincent is my second non-main character favorite. Like, when I say main character, I mean Cloud and Sephiroth and Tifa. Beyond those three, Sid and Vincent are my favorites. And I thought it was kind of cool that you had to like run around in this obscure forest in order to find Yuffie. And honestly, Vincent was, while you didn't have to get him, he was kind of hard. You'd have to actually deliberately not get him in order to not get him. Like, you couldn't help it. Like, he was part of the exploration.
And Valentine from his dark slumber. In Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, both characters are mandatory party members. While the way you recruit them is a bit different from the original, and we still can't actually play as Vincent, it seems like this is the only big change.
Why would you bring him into the game as an essential character, but you can't use him in your party? That seems dumb.
Rebirth makes
And a huge miss for this game, honestly.
to them. Okay, so this is the point where the big spoilers come into play. If you
Alright, this is the last chance, folks. Spoilers coming after this, so if you don't want to know, I suggest you turn off your video and navigate elsewhere. Otherwise, we're going to continue on and we're going to see the big spoilers. Fair warning.
If you haven't finished Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I highly recommend you do so before continuing. Like I said, big spoilers. I'll be going into characters' backstories, relationships, and the game's overall narrative, so proceed with caution. You've been warned.
I'm going through this because I still have no real intention of playing this game. Despite Final Fantasy VII, the original one, being my childhood favorite game.
For the most part, the cast members of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth are nearly identical to their 97 counterparts, albeit with more pixels. However, there is one notable exception, Sid.
Yeah, there is already one noticeable exception. Aerith is still alive. She died in the original one, so...
in Highwind. While we might still get the chance to pop by Rocket Town in the remake trilogy's final installment, Rocket Town, Shira, and Sid's entire backstory are noticeably absent from
Why would you skip that? He was a cool-ass character. Why would you skip that guy's backstory, but still make him, like, what seems to be a mandatory character, but you can't play in the town, which was one of the things you kind of had to do as part of the main story. Going to Rocket Town was part of the story.
Rebirth. Instead, Sid is first encountered by the team when they send up a smoke signal in hopes that a pilot will find them. Naturally, Sid is the pilot, and acts more as a method of fast travel rather than a true party member this time around. Compared to 97 Sid, Rebirth Sid has more of a Han Solo-esque personality. He confesses that he does the occasional job for Shinra if the money is right, and seems to be primarily driven by the desire for personal freedom. Additionally, Sid reveals that he knew Aerith's mother, which becomes the reason he is so eager to help Aerith.
That is not a thing that's in 7, honestly. It never comes up, it's never mentioned, it's not a thing. So they're adding dimension that wasn't there originally. So much for a remake. More like a retelling.
Aerith and the rest of the team. Considering the controversy surrounding Sid's original backstory, which portrayed Sid as extremely verbally abusive, it makes sense that Square Enix is reevaluating his introduction. If you played Remake, this statement might seem a bit silly, as the existence of parallel timelines was all but confirmed during the game's finale. That said, it's nice to have actual confirmation, and it's finally given to
Oh, look at that. Time travel and timelines is the ultimate killer of any and all things related to media and storytelling.
us in Rebirth. In the game's final chapters, we discover that Aerith is completely aware of several alternate universes, as well as the existence of a prime universe that follows the events of Final Fantasy VII. In every universe that is not following Fate's design, an enormous rift appears in the sky, as is the case with the dimension.
What in... This is like Kingdom Hearts. I hate this. Might as well call this Final Fantasy VII Kingdom Hearts. It's nonsense and I don't like it already.
Biggs and Zack exist in. This becomes interesting and concerning when you consider the game ends with Cloud essentially existing between two dimensions simultaneously, as he is still wholly perceived by his teammates in the Prime Dimension, but is also the sole party member able to see and interact with a version of Aerith who lived. While everyone else grieves Aerith and looks up at the clear sky, Cloud still sees his companion as well as a growing rift above. In the original Final Fantasy VII, there were quite a few things about Cloud and Tifa's relationship that felt a bit off. It was never quite clear, for example, why the pair didn't sit down and discuss what happened to them in Nibelheim or in the years following. Sure, we can assume that Tifa
But because he ran off to be a part of Soldier.
was taken aback by Cloud's claims, unsure of her own memories, and ultimately remained quiet to ensure her friend's psyche remained intact, but it certainly requires a lot of filling in the gaps from players. Thankfully, Rebirth makes things a lot more clear and interesting. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth kicks off with Cloud and Tifa being somewhat suspicious of each other. Cloud doesn't understand how Tifa could have survived being stabbed by Sephiroth, while Tifa doesn't understand how Cloud can vividly recount what happened in Nibelheim, as she doesn't recall him being there. While their relationship isn't completely
Because he was there. He just wasn't a member of Soldier at the time. He was a foot soldier and he was...
tainted by
Well, he had some things going on with him.
distrust, the seeds sown in the game's first act are reaped repeatedly throughout its story and nearly lead to Tifa's demise. Furthermore, the pair's uncertainty towards one another makes Aerith not confronting Cloud about Zack more reasonable as well. After watching Cloud struggle when confronted with information he doesn't remember or that contradicts his own thoughts, Tifa essentially becomes the buffer between Cloud and all this unsavory information. For example, when Cloud tells Tifa he suddenly remembers Zack drowning during the pair's final mission, Tifa tells Cloud to let her talk to Aerith about it, claiming that she's closer with her and can break it more gently. However, we as the players can tell she still doubts what Cloud is saying and knows Aerith will too. And speaking of Tifa, one of the biggest differences between Rebirth and the original is how much attention and care is given to her. While the martial arts master has always been a fan favorite character and one of the game's most important figures, Rebirth gives us the
I was not really a fan of hers, honestly.
chance to truly dive into her character. Throughout its chapters, we see her deep bond with Aerith, her concern over Cloud's deteriorating state, her grief, her confusion, and even her near death. While I'd argue Rebirth gives more love to just about every character, Tifa really gets some exceptional treatment in the series' latest entry. That covers it. The biggest changes to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, that and the fact that you can now date Red 13, or the combination
Why would you even be allowed to date any of them, let alone an animal? Like, why would that even be allowed?
of Kate, Sid, and Vincent if you really
Is that for the furries?
avoid getting close to any of your longer-term companions. While this certainly isn't an exhaustive list, other than the big twisty ending, the game sticks fairly close to the original narrative, while expanding the interpersonal connections between these long-beloved characters. And that, my friends, is the sign of a
That's going to be a no for me, but like I said, I prefer the originals. So, like I said, I'll not be playing this one. Bringing back Rebirth's best minigame, but it's going to be even better. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has plenty of minigames, as we just saw and read in the last article. None of them quite compare to Queen's Blood, which is not a game that I'm familiar with because it was not a thing in the original Final Fantasy VII, which is the only version of this game that I've actually played. Queen's Blood is one of those mini-games that players can easily sink dozens of hours into, collecting cards and advancing their ranks as they defeat the game's many opponents in a match. Since Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's launch, Queen's Blood has garnered praise that only mini-games like The Witcher 3 Gwent has received. That was enough. I played Witcher 3 and I never actually played Gwent. I found it to be incredibly boring. But that's me personally. Now, according to director Naoki Hamaguchi, in a recent interview with Polygon, Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 will bring back the acclaimed minigame and somehow make it even better. Queen's Blood is a turn-based collectible card game in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that plays out on a 3-row, 5-column board where each player builds a 15-card deck and places cards to claim space and earn points in each lane. Each card has power value and placement requirements, and players take turns placing cards to capture tiles, boost their own lanes, and disrupt their opponent. Winning lanes by having the higher total power adds those points to the player's score at the end of the match. And some cards also include special effects that buff their board or debuff their opponent. As players travel the world in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, beating other Queen's Blood players not only earns them new cards, but also raises their rank through a rather lengthy side quest, making it one of the most strategic and rewarding mini-games in gaming. As such, it's hard to believe that Part 3 could improve it, but according to Hamaguchi, it will. It's ultimately good news that Queen's Blood is returning in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, regardless of whether it's improving the minigame or not. However, its return was already confirmed back in August of 2024. It wasn't until recently that Hamaguchi mentioned it wouldn't be in the same game that players remember, but would instead be even better. Queen's Blood is a very popular and beloved minigame, and I believe a lot of people are still wanting something like that, Hamaguchi said during the interview. I want to expand on Queen's Blood so that we are enhancing it and giving you a more powered up version of it when you see that third installment. Queen's Blood is still going to be available in the third installment. We just want to expand it. And I wonder, because like I said, I don't know anything about this minigame itself, so I wonder how they're going to improve it. Any mention of improvements being made to Queen's Blood is great news, but Hamaguchi neglected to state during the interview exactly how the team would expand on the minigame in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. Even so, there are several possible ways Queen's Blood could be taken to the next level in the third and final entry of the remake trilogy, like new board layouts, better late game balance. And these are some of the things that they're suspecting that might be improved. Would be new board layouts or rule variants, stronger archetype support, better late game balance, world-based card acquisition, optional PvP or challenge modes, more narrative integration, rotating tournaments with modifiers. I think, like I said, having not played this game, the ones that seem to make the most sense to me and to add more of a collection aspect to the game would be the world-based card acquisition, where you can only acquire certain cards in certain towns or fall off of boss monsters. One interesting twist that I think might be, there was an old chess game. It was a 3D chess game, and you would move your pieces next to each other, and anytime you used one of the chess pieces would attack another chess piece, they would physically strike the enemy's piece. And I wonder if that's not something that wouldn't happen in this game. Like the character that's on the card pop out, cast a spell or make an attack on the enemy's card. I think that would be an interesting aspect to it, but it's, like I said, it's just my random thoughts. While these improvements are purely speculative, based on current state of Queen's Blood in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, new board layouts or rule variants could prevent late-game matches from feeling predictable, while stronger archetype support would encourage experimentation instead of funneling players toward a handful of optimal strategies. Expanding how cards are earned through world exploration, bosses, or side content would also help Queen's Blood feel more naturally embedded in the world. And rotating tournaments or optional challenge modes could give dedicated players reasons to keep returning between major story beats. If Square Enix also finds ways to tie Queen's Blood more directly into character arcs or Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 story, which I think would be a terrible idea, because why would you make a minigame part of the main story? The minigame could feel less like a side activity and more like a natural extension of the narrative. No, I think you should leave it like as a tavern game and not make it part of the main story, because that, to me, feels like it would kill the flow of the game itself if you have to stop and play a side quest game periodically throughout the game. That's a terrible idea to me personally. Queen's Blood already stands out as one of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's most memorable surprises, which is why expanding it in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 feels right. I mean, yeah, no problems with expanding it, just don't make it part of the main story. That feels wrong. Rather than simply bringing the minigame back for nostalgia's sake, Hamaguchi comments suggest a version that builds on what worked while addressing the places where it could grow. If Part 3 delivers a better Queen's Blood experience overall, it could cement the card game as a defining pillar of the remake trilogy and one of the best mini-games the series has ever produced. And they'll probably come out with some kind of trading card game, in the real world, or it'll be included in some version of remake of Kingdom Hearts, and it's just what's probably going to happen if it actually blows up like they suspect that it will. Excuse me. Alright, so this is more talking about the card game still as well. I'm just kind of glancing over this article, and it seems to just kind of cover what we've already talked about, so there's no really need to go over it again. So we can be done with this bit here. Thanks for watching. Drop a like and subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next video.